Boom, boom, boom. The sound shattered the silence. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. What was that? It came again. Boom, boom, boom. Someone was knocking on her front door, but it was so late. Past midnight, who could be out there in the pitch-black night? Rain lashed against her bedroom window, a wild, angry storm. She pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, a shiver tracing its icy path down her spine. She was all alone in the old house, miles from the nearest town. The knocking was loud, urgent. Sarah swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry like sandpaper. Maybe it was just the wind, some tree branch hitting the door. But no, this was different. This was a fist. A heavy fist. She slowly crept out of bed, her feet cold on the wooden floorboards. Each creak of the floor seemed to echo loudly in the sudden quiet between knocks. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, each tick a tiny explosion in the stillness. She held her breath, listening, waiting. Would it come again? The silence stretched, tightening like a rubber band about to snap. Then louder this time. Boom, 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 boom. It was insistent, demanding. Sarah's breath hitched. Her mind raced through all the scary stories her grandmother used to tell. Stories of things that wandered in the night, things that knocked on doors. She told herself it was silly. This was real life. Not some spooky tale, but a cold dread seeped into her bones, a feeling she couldn't shake. She had to see who it was, or what it was. She just had to know, even though every instinct screamed at her to hide under her covers and pretend she wasn't home. Her small lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The shadows looked like grasping claws, like menacing figures lurking just out of sight. She tiptoed down the hallway, her bare feet making no sound on the warm rug. The front door seemed miles away. It was a heavy oak door, strong and sturdy, but tonight it didn't feel safe. It felt like the only thing standing between her and something terrible. Something unknown. The knocking stopped again. Silence, a heavy, waiting silence. Sarah reached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. No, wait, the peephole. She had to look first. Sarah pressed her eye to the tiny peephole. Darkness, just the swirling rain and the black empty porch. No one was there. Absolutely no one. Could she have imagined it? No, the knocking had been too real, too loud. Her heart was still thumping like a drum. She backed away from the door, confused. Maybe they had given up and left. It was a strange thought. Why knock so desperately and then just disappear into the storm? A gust of wind rattled the windows, sounding like skeletal fingers tapping on the glass. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. She was about to turn back to her room, to the relative safety of her bed. But then she saw it. A small white square on the dark floorboards slipped under the door. A note? Her fingers fumbled as she picked it up. The paper was cold, damp from the rain. In messy, hurried handwriting, scrawled in what looked like red crayon, were 3 words. Never open the door. Chills ran down Sarah's spine. Never open the door, but why? Who wrote this? Was it a warning or a terrible, cruel joke? The house suddenly felt colder, the shadows deeper. A faint sound reached her ears. A whisper so soft she almost missed it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She strained to hear. Was it the wind or something else? It sounded like words, but she couldn't make them out, just a sibilant hiss like snakes slithering in the walls. Shh! Sarah. Her name? Did it whisper her name? No, it couldn't be. She was imagining things. The lack of sleep, the storm, the creepy note. It was all getting to her. She told herself to be calm, to think rationally. But rational thought was hard to find when your house felt like it was watching you. When the very air seemed thick with an unseen presence. She clutched the note tightly in her hand. Never open the door. The message was clear, but the knocking had stopped. Whoever it was gone. So the warning was too late, or was it for next time? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She found herself backing away from the door again, her eyes wide, scanning the darkened corners of the hallway. Every shadow seemed to take on a sinister shape. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep. Just as Sarah started to believe the worst was over, it began again. Boom! 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 Louder this time. More frantic, more desperate. It wasn't just knocking anymore. Now there was a scratching sound, like long fingernails raking across the wood. Scrape! Scrape! It made her teeth ache. It sounded like some wild animal trying to claw its way in. Sarah pressed her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the terrifying symphony of bangs and scratches. It was relentless, unstoppable. Her little house felt like it was under siege by something monstrous. She ran to the living room window, her heart pounding. Peeking through a tiny gap in the curtains, she saw nothing. Still nothing. Just the raging storm. The porch light flickered erratically, casting eerie, jumping shadows. But there was no one there. No person, no animal, nothing that could be making those horrible sounds. Then a new sound joined the chorus, a low, guttural humming. It vibrated through the floor, up her legs, into her chest. It was a deeply unsettling sound, ancient and wrong. It made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The house itself seemed to be groaning under the pressure. Sarah stumbled backwards, away from the window. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She felt trapped, utterly, terribly trapped. She looked at the steamed-up surface of the living room mirror. Words were forming there, as if an invisible finger was writing in the condensation. Slowly, letter by letter, "It sees you," Sarah screamed. A small, choked sound. It saw her. What saw her? How? She whirled around, her eyes darting into every dark corner. Was it inside already? The thought was too horrifying to bear. She had to get away. But where could she go? The knocking and scratching intensified. The humming grew louder, vibrating the very air around her. It felt like her head was going to explode. Panic clawed at her throat. She backed into the kitchen, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed the heaviest frying pan she could find, holding it like a weapon. It felt flimsy and useless against whatever was out there or in there. The kitchen window overlooking the dark back garden suddenly rattled violently, as if something huge had slammed against it. She was surrounded. There was no escape. The shadows in the kitchen seemed to stretch and writhe, taking on monstrous forms. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The knocking, the scratching, the humming, silence. A deafening heavy silence descended upon the house. It was more terrifying than the noise. Sarah stood frozen, the frying pan still clutched in her trembling hands. Her ears rang in the sudden quiet. Was it over? Had it given up? Or was it playing a new, more sinister game? She strained her ears, listening for any sound, the dripping of a tap in the sink, her own ragged breathing, the distant howl of the wind, but nothing else. The storm outside seemed to have quieted too. She took a tentative step, then another. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, loud in the stillness. She felt a cold spot right behind her, a chill that had nothing to do with the storm, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, like someone was standing there, watching her, breathing down her neck. But she was alone, wasn't she? She slowly turned around. Her heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. There was nothing there, just the empty, dark kitchen, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It was overwhelming. A whisper, cold as grave dirt, brushed against her ear. So close you should have never opened your mind to the fear. It wasn't a sound she heard with her ears, but a thought, an icy tendril of understanding that slithered directly into her brain. The warning on the note, never open the door. It wasn't about the physical door to the outside, it was about a door within herself, a door to something else, something that had been waiting, something that was now here. Her eyes widened in a final silent scream that no one would ever hear. She dropped the frying pan with a clang. The next morning the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the old house. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking gently in the morning breeze. Inside, the house was silent, empty. Sarah was gone, vanished without a trace. The only signs that anything had happened were the small, damp note still lying on the hallway floor and a single, muddy footprint. A footprint that was too large to be human. It pointed inwards, towards the heart of the house. Whatever had come knocking had found its way in, or perhaps it had been invited. And Sarah had paid the price.